You need a solid understanding of this left versus right conflict which is going on right now in the world. On one side we have so-called conservatives who actually don't conserve anything, right? They get elected, they promise the good old times, but actually it gets worse and worse for the average man. Just look at Brexit or Meloni in Italy. They have more migrants than ever before, even though they promised something different. And on the other side, you have like what is called the modern left, right? And today I will make the controversial point that in the Western world, there's actually no such thing as a strong, usable economic left. Sure, a lot of the parties in the Western countries, they promise more welfare and to fix inequality, but when they get elected, they actually don't do anything. And this even happens in the most socialist European countries where life still gets worse for everybody and they still face the same types of problems. And even though these types of leftists are completely useless from an economic standpoint, there is one thing which they are really good at and which is getting stuck in unwinnable culture wars that nobody cares about. They've reached the point where they are so isolated in their ivory tower that they are completely detached from reality. And more increasingly they are turning on their own people. You know, they introduced those purity tests where you have to be 100% perfect leftist if you don't want to be cancelled by your own peers. And the left simply does not understand that the average working class dude is not going to pass any of these purity tests. So imagine you have like a working class dude. I hate rich elites so much, screw them. Oh yeah, my rich asshole female boss forces me to get jabbed. She bought a new car with my labor, but women can't drive anyways. And the left, instead of just seeing that this is just a joke and mobilizing and capitalizing on the fact that this guy is already 70% a leftist, he's already on your side against rich people. All you have to do is to convert him. You can mobilize his anger and against his elites in your favor. But what does the modern left do instead? They call him an anti-vax, sexist, racist, misogynist, fascist, homophobic, transphobic, whatever, fascist, misogynist. And then when the working class dudes are going to the other side, the left pretends that they have absolutely no clue how this could happen. It's a complete mystery that nobody understands. Must be those stupid, uneducated, blue-collar people who are wrong and evil. So you see, there's a discrepancy between the values that politicians promise and what they actually deliver. They say one thing, but actually the life for the average people are getting more and more dystopian. There's also a different way to look at this problem instead of a left versus right approach in terms of a top versus bottom approach where you have rich people at the top. And actually rich versus poor and left versus right is intertwined in a certain way, but not how usually people expect. So let me share my own views on this topic. We can partition this in 4 different groups. You have the 90% at the bottom. Those are the poor people, you can call them working class people, you can even group the global south into this 90%, doesn't really matter, but basically those are the poor people that are screwed. Above them you have the 9%, then the 0.99%, and then the 0.01%. So who are those 9%? Those people are the very few leftovers, the very few remainders of what was the traditional middle class. Those people who can still afford a house, have one side of their family work, stay at home, and the same way it was basically the thing that we call the traditional family. There isn't that much left of those people, right? It was much more common in the past. I'm not saying that poor people did not exist in the past, in the 1950s, but back in the day, there was a much higher percentage of people who had access to buying a house. Above them you have the top 1%, and I divided them into the 0.99% and the 0.01%. And this distinction is important, because the 0.99% may be rich on paper, they may even be millionaires. But as opposed to the 0.01%, the 99% are mostly small to mid-sized businesses. 99%ers are local companies. They are stuck in the country where they are located. Those at the very top, they are transnational companies. They can pay taxes in one country, produce in the next one, afford lawyers in the third country. So it's a completely different beast. And those are the actual enemies, those are the problem. So let's go back how it fits into the left versus right issue. So on one side you have the so-called traditional conservatism and the others are the gay globalists. But actually both of these are just 2 different rebrands of capitalism. And we have to, in order to understand how this all fits together, we have to understand what capitalism is. And there are multiple different definitions of capitalism. In my view, the most logical way is to see capitalism as one single global system. Why? Because capital is inherently by its nature global. It does not really give a shit about borders. It does not care. And I can give you an example. Imagine you have a local company and you have two goals. The first one is to compete with other people, and the second one is to make as much profit as possible. And you can only compete if you are very efficient in how you use your resources, your employees, and how much you can produce. The problem is if you're stuck in a location which has too much bureaucracy and where workers have too many rights, imagine they are only allowed to work like 40 hours a week, it's impossible to compete with other companies who are larger than yourself. So you are limited by your local laws around you. But there is this magical thing called the border. And if you just walk a few hundred meters to the side, now you can exploit as many people as you want. So now you can produce even more shoes, and when you sell them back, all the government there cares is that you pay your import taxes, and that's it. They don't give a shit if you exploit people in different countries. So now you know what I mean, that capitalism is global in its nature. And if you keep running this for a few centuries, those structures become much more complicated. You have like this Dutch-Ireland sandwich where you can have part of your company in Ireland, the other one in the Netherlands, and then you can basically import into Europe without paying taxes. Those structures and those laws have to be organized somewhere. So you have companies that are global, they meet with businessmen from other countries, they meet with politicians from different places. They come together to, I wouldn't call those meetings secret, but they are closed meetings where the average Joe is not invited to, and then they make those laws. Because those tricks with saving taxes, not paying taxes in Panama or whatever they are, those are not coincidence. Those are intentionally planned laws distributed across different countries, and this needs coordination. People have to meet behind closed doors with politicians and businessmen to arrange these types of laws. This is why, in my view, it makes absolutely zero sense to confine the definition of capitalism to a single local country. It's one global thing. And this global machine needs growth as much as it can. And my opinion is controversial point, but this type of growth is no longer possible. The way we know it is actually dead. Because it needs growth to live, and in the past that growth came from mostly free sources. You had a massive population boom in the Western world, the so-called boomer generation, and when they entered the workplace, they also entered the markets as consumers, so you had more money flowing, circulating, and capitalism could grow. You had a lot of innovation, and of course, a lot of the growth and the wealth came from the third world. But nowadays, the markets may seem grow on paper, but actually it's just an illusion. Of course, there's still some innovation nowadays, but this is confined to a small section of companies. So there's like AI research and Nvidia, and those people have real actual growth driven by innovation. But the remaining part of what we call growth is actually coming out of two different sources. The first one is the money printer, right? If we print new money and your stocks, your S&P 500 goes up by 10%, yeah, you make money, you are rich, you got richer by 10%. But if everything goes up by 10%, you are not actually getting rich, you know? It just means that everybody else got poorer by 10%. And another source next to the money printer where a lot of what we call growth is coming from is actually from the former middle class. It's being slaughtered like a piggy bank and redistributed to the rich, and some of it also gets redistributed to the bottom 90% in terms of welfare, so they stay quiet and don't rise up too early. Those 9% have something in common if we look closer. Accumulating wealth, paying off your house, and starting a business, it all takes time. Right? So those people who own those small businesses are usually older people. Back in the day, you almost always had men running companies, so it's older men. And since we are in the Western world where most of this piggy bank is located that is about to be slaughtered, you are talking about white people. So you have old white men which have all the capital, and now seemingly out of nowhere you see a culture war emerge which is striking exactly against those old white men. What a convenient coincidence. And a lot of leftists may interject and say, yeah, but we want to improve those lives too. But in practice they actually never do. So how does this fight work? Before I explain how left and right fit into these 4 different categories of wealth, let me elaborate who is fighting who. The 90% at the bottom are fighting everybody above them, and they see those people as rich. The bottom 90% are the people who have already lost. There is no actual representation of them because we are lacking a real, strong, usable economic left. The 0.01% they fight everything below them, and the 9% and 0.99% in the middle, they are not just fighting everybody else around them, but they also fight each other. In most Western countries, those 9% are responsible for paying most of the taxes, which is collected in form of income taxes, and they dislike the 0.99% above them. The 0.99% are also fighting, because unlike the very large mega corporations at the very top, the smaller companies and medium-sized companies, they simply cannot keep up with all the bureaucracy and all this pointless regulation, especially if the mega corps can just avoid environmental regulation bullshit by just going somewhere else. The local companies are screwed, and those smaller to medium-sized companies are also facing cultural pressure in forms of ESG Pride Month bullshit and all those DEI bullshit laws, and small to medium-sized companies, they cannot just hire more women. To give you another example of this war between the 0.01% and the 0.99%, during COVID, all those small businesses had to close, had to shut down, like your local clothing store was not available. But do you know from who you could still buy clothing? Exactly, from Amazon and from other major, really large corporations. No matter who actually wins, whether it's the conservative right or the so-called left, the 0.01% they will always win in both cases. So, who are those people at the very top? Well, in my view, it is dishonest to say that there's only one single homogeneous elite at the very top. Instead, you have multiple competing factions, multiple smaller competing elites, and right now it is not really sure who of them will win. But what is clear right now is that there are two main projects right now that are being realized and have a real chance of winning this war. So, on one side, you have people like Trump, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and on the other side, you have Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, Soros. Those two groups are fighting about which project is actually going to dominate the future. Calling one of these groups globalists is actually not really honest, because capitalism, as I explained earlier, is one single global behemoth anyways. So I just call them quote-unquote leftists. And those are fighting the two layers in the middle using something that's called the salami method. So imagine you have a salami sausage and I asked you for a really thin slice of it. Once you have agreed to give me a really thin slice of your salami, your sausage looks pretty much like it looked before. The size is still the same, right? But if I keep chipping down and asking again and infinite times for a very thin slice of salami, you are left with nothing and you didn't even notice it. This strategy is mostly noticeable in Western Europe, where a significant portion of what used to be called the middle class is located. It starts with something innocent like a CO2 tariff on gasoline, and now you have to pay $40 extra every single month to fill your car. And they will tell you, oh, it's just $40. Don't be such a bitch about it. You don't need a car anyways. Some other law makes heating your house more expensive by $80 a month. Then they will mess with the property tax and now you have to pay $30 more a month. And if you keep doing this for a decade, more and more middle class people have to sell their house. And to whom do they sell to? They sell to the 1% above them. Such laws have almost no impact on the environment and are at best a delusional way to consume what is left of the middle class. And this is how the left keeps regulating the 9% to death, because for a modern leftist, those 9% are already considered rich. If you can afford to buy a house in today's day and age, you can afford to pay even more taxes. The modern left will not only try to crush the 9%, but also the 0.99% above them. Once they've succeeded, they will try to move on to the 0.01%, and this is where they completely get stomped. Because they have completely forgotten that they are the useful idiots who just finished serving their purpose. If the 9% and 0.99% are destroyed, there will be a lot of anger in those groups. The super rich will mobilize this anger against the left, which leads to a full takeover. Compared to what the right tries to achieve. The right does not really care about the bottom 90% and they don't care about the global south either. But at least they want to keep the 0.99% and also some of the remaining 9% below them as a buffer. The right will allow the middle class to preserve its culture and ethnic identity. And they also want to keep borders and nation states intact. The modern left wants none of that. Just mega corporations owning their own autonomous regions full of interchangeable and diverse human resources with no ethnic identity. So what should you do in this war? It's obvious that the golden post-World War II era is over. It was a historic anomaly anyways. The lifestyle of the 1950s will never come back. I myself don't really know which monster will emerge from the ashes of capitalism, but it will definitely get worse for the average man, no matter whether the left side or the right side wins. Social mobility will continue to dry up, and let me elaborate what I mean by that. Social mobility basically means your ability to move upwards into a better class. In the past, it was completely possible with a normal job if you are a janitor or a bus driver to buy a house and feed an entire family. Nowadays, social mobility is only possible if you go viral as an influencer or are a successful entrepreneur. Maybe you picked the right meme coin, I don't know. In the future, there will be no social mobility anymore. So if you're born poor, you will stay poor forever and no lucky meme coin will save you. Luckily, we are still in the present where we still have some social mobility, which means that you have a few years left to get rich. I don't know if it's 5 years or 10 years, but definitely now is the time to take action. Because the war between left and right will just continue to escalate. Just don't make the mistake in thinking that the world and politics, what's happening to us, the lockdowns that we saw during COVID, those are not things that just happen to you and you just watch it like a movie. It's actually interactive. You have impact in this world. Treat it like a video game and not like a movie.